So, Dr. Nick, one of the things that I keep thinking about with the, again, a nice trend towards people looking more broadly, more deeper into the combinations of what really does drive human performance and going beyond just technical mastery, or someone having potentials of what they may perceive them to be, that they're now looking at embracing the mental wellness aspects, the mind, the body, the spirit. So, in terms of your own journey, which you shared with us previously, which was great to hear, and you have many years of experience to share with us, have you noticed a difference in terms of performance from those teams that you've worked with? And I know that you've worked with some phenomenal teams. I know you've worked with amateurs that have gone pro. I know that you've worked with some Fortune 100 organizations. So, what can you share with us about people that have embraced this?
It's a great question, Paul. And you know what I would say is there's not a question in my mind that when people embrace this of wellness, we're talking about it existing, in a system. Like values exist in a system, and personalities exist in systems, and cultures exist in systems. So you can't just have one component. So if you're taking care of your physical self, but
Yeah.
not taking care of your spiritual or mental well-being, then you don't have the whole system together. So when you put all of these together and a person embraces that optimal functioning requires the blending and the melding of all three of those, you will actually see a difference.
Mhm.
Those individuals are healthier physically. They have the ability to understand and see things in a much more kind of global perspective. They tend to think outside the box and be creative. They tend to be more intuitive. That is, that they can understand things without having a clear explanation, but actually be very accurate about that.
Mm.
So we need to blend all of those. And when we're talking about mental wellness here, we're talking about the mind and brain, obviously the body and spirituality. So we always separate the mind and brain. People get those things a little bit confused, and personality. But as we go through this, I'll try to help you get a better understanding of why we need to look at brain functioning and mind functioning and how those all go together in what we would describe as mental wellness.
That's great. So, what would you say then if we were to be able to look at that separation in terms of the mind and the brain? What have organizations traditionally been more focused on, and what would you like more organizations to be focused on going forward?
Well, if we're looking at organizations that might not be as sensitive to this, they're really looking at things that are measurable, like the bottom line, and then being able to have leadership based upon those kinds of data.
Yep.
What we're looking for now is what's appearing in the research is that higher level performers, people at the helm of corporate America, we're now looking towards individuals that have more of an ability to be altruistic, to be empathic, to be understanding. And I think what we're going to see in the shift over the next 20 years or so is that I remember about 15 years ago, I was speaking to someone in corporate America, and they say, forget about the MBAs, we need people with MFAs. And I said, what do you mean? And they started talking about the ability to use that kind of thinking that occurs in fine art, the ability to see things that aren't existing.
Hmm.
The whole "this is the first day" concept, that we need to be able to embrace all of what's going on, not just the bottom line. The bottom line is going to be affected by this kind of mental well-being. So there's a movement towards that now. In the past, I would think we didn't see that so much.
Yeah. So if we could just touch upon, I just very briefly, and we'll get further into this as we move along, but just so that we could have a greater understanding between what you were referring to as separating the mind and the brain. I think that would be good if we just touch upon that. And then again, we'll get into more detail as we go on, but I think it'll be good to introduce that to a degree.
Sure. I'm sorry I didn't get that clear before, Paul.
No
Uh,
worries.
so,
No worries.
the brain is an organ not unlike the pancreas,
Yeah.
but the function of the organ is digestion or metabolism. So the function of the brain is the mind. So it's been hard to really quantify what consciousness is about,
Mhm.
but we can certainly take a look at the brain. Now, if there's a dysfunction in the brain, there's going to be a dysfunction in the mind.
Okay.
So, for example, some children are born with low thresholds to stimulation for anxiety. And
Hmm.
research that went on for about 50 years found that at about the age of 11 months, we could identify which children might experience anxiety as they grow older.
Hmm.
Now, as a parent, if you knew that there was that kind of predisposition in your child, you might want to respond to them differently
Right.
than a child who doesn't have a condition like that.
I see.
Well, that condition isn't treated effectively. And now we have that individual in the world, as a young person or perhaps even as a corporate leader who still suffers from anxiety, but it's
Mhm.
never been clearly understood that there's a brain dysfunction with lower thresholds that makes that person much more prone to anxiety. Think about the misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So we would try to change one's mind about the ability to not have the experience with anxiety, and there's ways that can be done. So I can show you some brain functioning before and after when we found individuals that had thresholds that were lower and how we were able to modify even the functioning of the brain by using the mind.
Right.
So the brain is the organ, the mind is the
That's
function. If the
phenomenal.
brain if the brain is dysfunctioning, the mind will be dysfunctioning. If the mind is dysfunctioning, like believing things that are not true,
Yeah.
the brain will dysfunction and create anxiety.
Yep.
So anxiety comes from two sources. One is that can be an inherent predisposition in your brain. The
Yep.
other, and that will increase, the ability to experience anxiety. The other is a misconstruction of the world. And as a result of that, influence the brain's functioning.
Yeah. So basically, then what we're going to be doing, and this is great, that was perfect for us to understand. And I think what we are going to be doing with the series of talks is really to help us understand how we can better deal with the mind. And so when we talk about mental wellness, we're really talking about how we can really take care of our mind, which in turn will have a positive impact on the brain, which in turn will have a positive impact on our body.
Absolutely. And if we were to work alone, if we were to work with the first aspect of high level functioning, as you know, in corporate America, it's awareness.
Yeah.
If you're not aware, if you don't know what you don't know, how you can do something about that.
Right.
So if, for example, you were to find someone, even in your corporation, who's suffering from anxiety and has a physiological basis, it'd be great for that person to understand that that's the truth and that there's ways that they can get help with that because
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
physical situation. Now, using the mind, as you say, we're going to teach people how to increase awareness, how
Yep.
to modify distractions that will influence performance, um, how to rely more on intuition if it's available to you,
Mhm.
and how to make effective judgments and take appropriate risks.
Yeah, it's great. So as an accountant, one thing I want to be able to validate is that you said something I thought that was great early on with this topic about that it's just not about the numbers or judging or measuring ourselves in terms of whether that's how profitable we may be as an organization, how many wins or victories we have as a team, what my students' test scores may be, but that those are outcomes and they're all important. And look, as accountants, we love data, and the data is very important. It's a guiding. I think if we use it as a guiding way in which we make sure that we are achieving the results that perhaps we're capable of, and maybe we're underachieving, overachieving, but it gives us a baseline, and that's a very important. We need measurement, right? We need measurement. We need reinforcement. So we need standards. So all that's very important. But I think what you said was real important is that we also need to be taking into account what drives the numbers, and in my introduction, where I talked about why I'm particularly passionate about this and how I've learned a lot from you along the way. I've seen organizations that used more of how to drive better performance, how to speak to a person's soul, how to get inside someone so that they feel that they're connected to the organization, and how do I build an environment that really does look towards the individual and how they perform as the basis for really achieving great outcomes. So the person that ran that I spoke about in the introduction, he never judged the success of his company solely by the numbers, and the numbers were important, but they weren't the driving force. And so a lot of decisions that were made were more based on what's in the best interest for this organization from the long term, based on how I am interacting with my people. So it was really interesting, but I think it's good to point out and validate exactly what you were talking about, that we have examples of organizations that are phenomenally successful if you base them on a purely financial statement point of view, but there's a method to sort of that approach.
I think that there's some data that we can get that will support what we're talking about. So whether we see, the longstanding uh, examples of people working for the corporation over a period of time, or performance, we're going to get down to what we briefly talked about before, which is understanding. So
Right.
when you look at units, people, humans don't do well in isolation. They do well in a corporate way, and that's not business corporate, but it's about a sense of belonging. So that the essential element for that is understanding. And when the corporation offers that, you'll see people are going to respond in a very different way. And my guess is you'll start to see things go up, like productions, or
Yeah.
less time off from work.
Right.
And that they're not there just because they have to get the work done. They're there because the workplace is now a place that's supportive and understanding, not unlike some of the things that you're doing out west.